Welcome to the symposium presented by Taylor Huber, where we will embark on the great conversation. Please follow for updates and share if this podcast has impacted you. Now, on to this week's episode.
To this week's episode of the Symposium. We are moving on from Karl Barth to discuss Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and we're going to do a brief overview of the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and then discuss some notable events and then why Catholics should read Bonhoeffer, because this series is part of non-Catholics that Catholics should read. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was instrumental to my faith formation in general. The first work I ever read of his was The Cost of Discipleship, probably my junior year, maybe even sophomore year of high school. I started digging into it, and it was probably my first exposure to probably some dense theology. But also Bonhoeffer writes differently than Karl Barth in that he's very plain or pastoral. He's not necessarily concerned with citing everything. It's not necessarily an academic work, but yet it's very in depth. That just because it's not academic doesn't mean it's not intellectual. So. And the biggest part about it is he's wrestling with what it means to follow Jesus. And we're going to discuss this work in another episode. And then next week's episode, we'll discuss life together and dig into Bonhoeffer's view of community and how that can help shape parish life in general. But Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran clergyman of the 1920s and 30s and 40s. He was born in 1906 and was killed in 1945 at the age of 39 in a Nazi concentration camp by being hung on a piano wire, dying the most honorable deaths for the sake of Christ and resistance to Nazism. Although he lived a much and considerable shorter life than than Karl Barth, I would say he's more well-read and widely read across the spectrum in Christendom. And part of this, I think, is because of how he died, but then also I think another aspect is his works became more accessible to lay people because of his life and the public witness he professed, while Barth was very much in academic, and his works were usually only in German until later they were translated. So just the accessibility, I think, plays a huge part. But Bonhoeffer, his works are theological, very widely read, but when you read it as if you read him as a man who is driven and not afraid to mince words. And again, I've read several of his works multiple times. I've read portions of his sermons on Genesis and essays on ethics. But in regards to his life, I want to share a couple of vignettes or stories that I think can capture and enlighten our future episodes by realizing the commitment that this man had for the faith and how that can motivate us today. So he grew up in Germany, German household, and Bonhoeffer turned away from law and in politics to pursue theology at the age of 14, which much to the disapproval of his own parents. Nevertheless, he did quite fine for himself. He actually studied under Karl Barth for a season and achieved his doctorate at age 21. Now, there was a dramatic shift in his conviction and faith when he left Germany in 1930 to study at Union Theological Center. And what's interesting is that his spark of revival or more outspoken commitment to speak the gospel or speak the words of Christ in the public sphere happened not from a classroom, but from his time spent in Harlem with the African American Christians that resided there. And it says that when he was with them, he saw people who sang and danced with the joy of the Lord, people who are truly enlivened by the life of Christ. And it was through witnessing their suffering and oppression that convinced Bonhoeffer not to just stay in America where it was safe, but to return to Germany, saying, "I have come to the conclusion that I have made a mistake coming to America. I must live through this difficult period in our national history with the people of Germany. I will have no right to participate in the reconstruction of the Christian life in Germany after the war if I do not share in the trials of this time with my people." It was on the last boat from America to Germany that he sailed off to a very uncertain future. And now the second story I want to share is about between his time returning to Germany and before being captured. When Bonhoeffer returned, he participated in a group that also Bart participated in. It was called the Confessing Church. Think of it as a underground Christian seminary / community that was resisting the politics and the war of Germany at the time. And he would spend months with these group of men outside of villages, teaching and living life together in almost a monastic-like fashion. And much of what he writes about this expedition and experience and way of living, he writes in Life Together, is kind of his condensed understanding of what Christian community ought to look like. Now, Bonhoeffer came from a very prestigious family, well known, and his family started becoming concerned, almost like how the family of Christ became concerned, and they send his brothers, his cousins, to fetch him and call him out of his public ministry. And like Jesus, Bonhoeffer stands as a witness even to his own family. And so he's outside of town in this community, and one of his brothers came out to get him. And his brother arrived and tried to sway him to come back to society, per se. And Dietrich told his brother to join him for a boat ride, and they would discuss this matter in private. So they went on a boat, and they rowed to the other side of this body of water, not really saying much, until they arrived onto a small hill where, looking down on a Nazi youth camp, yes, a Nazi youth camp, those things existed. If you want an idea of what I'm talking about, go watch the movie Jojo Rabbit. Wonderful movie. Pause this, go watch it. I highly recommend it. But essentially, imagine the Boy Scouts, but training children to be Nazi soldiers and idolize Hitler was the whole, essentially VBS for Hitler is what it was. So he looks down on these camps, these propaganda camps that were training grade school children. Bonhoeffer looked and stood at his brother and said, "This," meaning the church, "must be stronger than that. This must be stronger than that." That just as the evil in the world was rallying people together to its message, the church must also rally its people in an even more serious and devout manner than the world is. Later, and during the war, Bonhoeffer would be engaged in to be married, but was then captured and placed in Tegel prison and then transferred to a concentration camp, where he even had the chance to escape with fellow prisoners, but desired to stay so that his family and fellow conspirators and those he was imprisoned with would not be punished for his escape. So he made up his mind already to lay down his life for the sake of others, to help those who are suffering. Even in the midst of despair, he was more alive than those on the outside. Bonhoeffer would be martyred 30 days before his camp was liberated by the Allies. While death would take his life, his legacy would inspire another man of faith named Martin Luther King Jr., who was inspired by Bonhoeffer's nonviolent view of Jesus' message that informed him how to combat evil through the civil rights in our own country. But this series is called Protestants That Catholics Should Read, or Non-Catholics That Catholics Should Read. So in a nutshell, why should a Catholic read Bonhoeffer? Well, I think part of it is his life commitment and development in long suffering is beyond enough for us to take to heart and to really consider his words in comparison with his life. I think his resistance to violent civil discourse, to the political machine, is a message to us Catholics, especially those of us who feel like we're used to having power, that things should go our way in society when it comes to civil discourse or politics. And I see far too many well-meaning, passionate believers, Catholics, fall prey to aggression as they speak against cultural or even ecclesial issues in the world and the church. I think Bonhoeffer brings passion, but also temperance together as he lives with his devotion with Christ. Passion with temperance. That he didn't stoop to hate his enemy. He even, his works of letters from prison we only know about them because Bonhoeffer befriended a Nazi soldier that was his guard and won him over through his loving kindness and long suffering and patience. And that this is what Bonhoeffer can embody for us, and that we need to realize in our own time and day, and not to be swayed by whatever is going on in the church or whatever is going on in politics. So many times it's easy to use our aggression as violence or judgment or slander towards those who may be on the other side, not realizing that it's through suffering and martyrdom that the way of the gospel is planted and spread. And Bonhoeffer not only preached this, but lived this, and it cost him his life.